Coming up, a record-breaking night for Donovan Mitchell, and the Dubs get a last-second win in double overtime. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA, local experts going over the biggest stories on the hardwood. I am your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Let's get ready to go over the action for you from yesterday. Donovan Mitchell did something no one has ever done in a Cavs uniform. That includes LeBron. Mitchell dropped 71 points in an overtime win over Chicago on Monday night. Locked On Cavs is in to go over one for the record books.
Chris Manning, Evan Damler here. Donovan Mitchell, 71 points. The Cavs were down by 15 at the half. Mitchell's kind of struggling. He dropped 71. That's the most in Cavs history. That's one of, I believe, 7 players in NBA history to drop 70 or more in a game. Utterly insane MVP chance for Mitchell. I mean, Evan, flabbergasting performance from Donovan Mitchell.
I mean, he broke the previous single-game scoring record of the season so far, held by Donovan Mitchell with 69 points. So, just an insane game across the board. Even more wild than he only had 15 points in the first half, and just absolutely uncorked an all-time historic game. Like that's what it is. This is historic.
Not hyperbole to say that this is perhaps
It's one of the best games I have ever seen in person.
It is perhaps the best offensive performance by a Cavs player in the regular season of all time. It is not hyperbole to say that is how good Donovan Mitchell was. For more, Locked On Cavs, wherever you get your podcast.
The Pelicans lose on the road to the 76ers, but the bigger loss is Zion Williamson, who exited this game due to injury. Locked On Pelicans gives us the latest on everything postgame.
Zion Williamson leaves with a hamstring injury as the Pelicans lose to the 76ers. Now what for New Orleans? I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans and Locked On NBA. In 28 minutes, Zion put up 26 points on 10 of 12 shooting, grabbed 6 rebounds, and dished out 7 assists as New Orleans took the lead for the first time in the second half after being down as many as 15 points to Philly. In short, Zion looked unstoppable and like he was going to carry the Pelicans to another win. But all of a sudden, he pulled up limping and checked himself out of the game. The Pelicans later announced that Zion was out for the rest of the night with a hamstring injury. While New Orleans fought hard, they just didn't have enough offense and defense to keep up with Philly. The good news is Brandon Ingram is set to return, but after missing as many as 18 games, how effective will he be as he gets his legs back under him? To keep the Pelicans afloat, it may come down to their bench, which has stepped up this season and will need to step up yet again.
The Pacers held court at home, getting their 4th win in a row after beating the Raptors last night. Locked On Pacers and Locked On Raptors break things down from both sides.
Tony East here with Locked On Pacers. After the Pacers beat the Raptors for the Pacers' 5th win in a row, their 6th and 7th games, they are absolutely rolling right now as the new year begins. And they beat the Raptors behind maybe their best bench game of the season. 54 points combined for their second unit. TJ McConnell with 15, Benedict Mathurin with a smooth 21, Jalen Smith with 11, O'Shea Brissett with 5. That's what the Pacers needed in this game. Very balanced attack. Nobody outside of Mathurin over 20 points for this Pacers team as they pull away in the 4th to get this one done and improve to 21-17. They are firmly in the playoff spots in the East, and they keep rolling behind Tyrese Haliburton's stellar play. He had another 16.8 assist performance and well-improved play from their second unit in recent games and weeks. They'll continue rolling and look to as the year turns. We'll have more on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
Is it possible to find silver linings in a loss that brings you to 16-21? Sean Woodley here from Locked On Raptors to break down the Raptors' 122-114 loss in Indiana against the Pacers on Monday. A loss that now sees the Raptors in sole possession of 12th place in the Eastern Conference. Few games back of the teams that are fighting for the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference as well. So they got some work to do. That said, this game did feature some positive signs that the Raptors can in theory build on. Scotty Barnes had maybe his best game of the entire season when you factor in offense and defense. He was tremendous as a rim protector in this game, a thing that he's kind of sneakily gotten better at over the course of his rookie season, which has featured a lot of defensive missteps and miscues. He was also fantastic offensively. The Raptors are using him more as a center now than they have all season long, and he's really carving up the middle of the floor. 23, 8-8 for Barnes in this one. The Raptors also got some health. Precious Achiuwa returned returned. Didn't play a ton, but showed his immense defensive upside in stretches of this game. He back in the lineup is a massive addition for the Raptors. Fred VanVleet also returned. He had himself a not so good game, just 3 of 12 from downtown for a guy who has to hit threes for the Raptors to be at their best. Lots of questions to be answered for this Raptors team between now and the deadline. They have a 6-game homestand coming up. They've got to make up some ground there. If not, things are going to get dark real quick, but there are signs of life for the Toronto Raptors. I'll have more broken down on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Raptors. Be sure to tune in.
Not much fight out of the Spurs in Brooklyn as the Nets rolled to their 12th straight victory. Locked On Nets has more on a team that seemingly can't do any wrong.
Doug Norrie, Locked On Nets, coming at you following yet another win by the Brooklyn Nets, who have now won their last 12 games in a row, 16 of their last 17. They are on a streak like we really haven't seen from this team before, and one we haven't seen in the NBA all that much lately. Brooklyn is about as hot as you can get. It takes very little for them to get past the Spurs. They end up winning 139-103 in a game that's never close. Kyrie Irving scores 27 and has a highlight throwdown putback dunk that really solidified the entire game. Kevin Durant puts in 25 of his own. No one on the Nets is forced to play more than 30 minutes. We are going to be breaking down the win, this recent Nets win streak, all on the Locked On Nets podcast.
Coming up, an unlikely hero for the Warriors. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by BetOnline, the #1 spot for all of your online sports betting needs. You can head over there to get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur sport that's out there. Whatever you want to bet on, you can do that at betonline.net. It's where the game starts. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Warriors won their 5th game in a row thanks to a vintage performance from Klay Thompson and also some heroics from Kevon Looney in double overtime. Locked On Warriors and Locked On Hawks with all the details on that dramatic finish.
The Golden State Warriors winning streak extends to 5 following a double overtime thriller at Chase Center. I'm Cyrus Satsas. Happy New Year with your Locked On Warriors, Locked On Now recap of the Golden State Warriors in double overtime, hanging on to defeat the Atlanta Hawks by a buzzer beater from Kevon Looney, who finished the game with 14 points and 21 rebounds. The final 2 rebounds coming on a pair of putback attempts, with the second one falling in again at the buzzer, a buzzer-beating victory shot for Kevon Looney on a night when Klay Thompson also deserves accolades. He put in 54 points in the victory. Klay does look back, folks. The Warriors next host the Detroit Pistons on Wednesday. Follow the program on Twitter at Locked On Dubs.
Hello, friends. My name is Brad Rowland, and the Atlanta Hawks fall in a heartbreaker on this Monday evening into Tuesday. The Hawks were trailing by 21 points in the first half, made a furious comeback in the second half, led by as many as 9 points in the fourth quarter, had opportunities to win this game in regulation, in the first overtime, and then lost in the double overtime period while being tied in the final seconds. All kinds of stuff to break down from this game, but the biggest issue perhaps was the giant hole they had to dig out of in the first half. They played well after that. There were some issues down the stretch, as you might imagine, in a game that went this long. But long story short, the Hawks have now lost 10 of the last 14 games. They've lost 4 in a row, and the West Coast trip continues with a trip to Sacramento on Wednesday. We'll have full coverage of this game and more on Locked On Hawks podcast.
A sleepy Dallas team able to overcome their slow start to get a win on the road in Houston. Locked On Mavs is in to recap for us.
The Dallas Mavericks get a clutch win against a not great opponent, but Christian Wood plays really well on both ends. Luka Doncic bails him out. Nick Angstead from the Locked On Mavericks podcast here. And the Dallas Mavericks played an awful first half, just absolutely awful. 18 points in the first quarter, 26 in the second. They were shooting 34% from the field. Just didn't look like anything was going well for the Dallas Mavericks offensively. Another game where they were 6 of 22 from 3, and if they're not hitting their threes, then nothing goes well for them, it seems. But then in the second half, they really figured out a way to turn it on in the third quarter. Luka Doncic just took over. It's the only way the Mavericks can really get going right now to get any kind of spark. 19 points in the third quarter for Luka Doncic. And then Christian Wood with some incredible plays in this game. Some great winning basketball from Christian Wood, which is a player we've been asking. Can he play winning basketball? Can he be part of a defense that can win games in the clutch like this? 21 points, 7 boards, 4 assists, 5 blocks for Christian Wood. A great outing for him. We'll talk about that and more on tonight's Locked On Mavs.
Minnesota outlasts the Denver Nuggets to get their first win in quite a while. Locked On Timberwolves just happy to go over a Minnesota victory.
The long losing streak is over. The Timberwolves won for the first time in almost 2 weeks as they defeated the Denver Nuggets on Monday night by 13 points. I'm Ben Beacon, host of the Locked On Wolves podcast. And the Wolves were without D'Angelo Russell, of course, still no Karl Anthony Towns. Among other players missing, no Naz Reid tonight. Jalen Noel started his first game of the season. And the Wolves played really well overall and led for much of the game. Denver put on a run in the middle of the kind of third quarter into the fourth quarter. This was a 2-point game with about 5 minutes to play. And yet the Wolves ended up winning by double figures. Anthony Edwards was fantastic. 29, 10, and 5 for Ant. Scored at will down the stretch. Jaden McDaniels was awesome as well as the Nuggets struggled with their perimeter defense. Jokic was good, almost had a triple-double once again, but had 5 turnovers, and the Timberwolves did a pretty good job holding him in check overall. So well-rounded and impressive win for Minnesota, snapping the losing streak. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Wolves for all things Timberwolves.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Now make sure you are subscribed to Locked On NBA and, of course, your favorite teams, Locked On Podcast, on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts from. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.